Why aren't your kids interested in school? They bully each other, complain continuously about how much stress they're under, they don't get their assignments done on time, and many of them are not really sure how or if the situation is going to improve at college, or even if they're going to go to college. Why are your kids so confused? The whole reason for these problems is a lack of intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation differs from extrinsic motivation in that extrinsic motivation is motivation which is responsible for the pursuit of a goal not inherent in an activity itself. For instance, you could write an essay for the extrinsic reward of a grade, or you could write an essay for the intrinsic reward of the pleasure of expressing your thoughts coherently and beautifully. The grade is extrinsic, because just because you write an essay doesn't mean you get a grade. That's not the way life in general works, only how school works. There are three main constituents of the problem of intrinsic motivation in schools. There is a lack of self-knowledge, which results from the fact that schools don't teach kids to get to know themselves, only to get to know systems and forms of knowledge which society judges to be important. The second constituent is perhaps too much stress on information work, which limits the fields of activity that children see as suitable for their futures. And another problem is the problem of internalized grades in schools. This is basically the problem of kids being taught that getting a grade is all that matters, and that you can judge a person's morality chiefly by their grades. So first, we're going to examine the problem of the lack of self-knowledge. In the book Why Schools Don't Educate, the famous teacher said that he observed 10 problems in public schools, which included a lack of empathy for others, a lack of curiosity, and several other problems. The lack of kindness to others, which is responsible for bullying and the general crass attitude of many children toward becoming a successful member of society, is, along with the lack of curiosity, which means that children aren't able to propel themselves to learn without the promise of a grade or parental approval at the end, are both because of an underlying lack of self. If you lack self-knowledge, if you lack the sense of self-value, you will try to replace self-value with value through grades, and also, perhaps, value through being cruel to others, which is the reason why bullies exist. If schools found a better way of teaching children to live their own lives and find value in their own activities, these problems could be avoided. Maria Montessori, the famous Italian educator, researched other problems with the lack of intrinsic motivation among school children. In her famous book, The Montessori Method, from early in the 20th century, she compared many school children's lives to the lives of government clerks who sit all day at a desk processing tables of figures and contracts, with their only ultimate goal being the pursuit of a raise or simply to keep their job. In the same way, many children sit at desks all day in school and do nothing but hope to get to the next grade through getting good enough scores on their assignments. They don't do any of their work because they value the work itself. They only value the extrinsic reward. She came up with a very beautiful analogy for the relationship of intrinsic motivation to the lives of successful kids, which was the jockey gives sugar to his horse to make it run faster, and the coachman whips his horses to make them run faster, but neither of those types of horses run as beautifully as the free horses of the plains. And she summarized all of her discoveries about intrinsic motivation under the term prizes and punishments, which appears often in her book. Prizes are any sort of positive reinforcement given by authority figures to children to make them do certain activities, and punishments are all the negative reinforcements given by authority figures. She said that without intrinsic motivation, which she called the inner force, which drives people to do good work, any extrinsic positive or negative rewards are basically like just tiny lights in the midst of a vast dark plain across which people wander without ultimate purpose. And in conclusion, we can, it's safe to say that the lives of many school children today have a severe lack of self-knowledge and a knowledge of intrinsic motivation. The second problem is why there is such a stress on information work and such a devaluation of manual or blue-collar work in school. Mike Rose, in his excellent book, Why School, researched the on-the-job lives of many blue-collar workers, such as waitresses, hairstylists, and also carpenters, and found that whereas we often tend to think of those jobs as being completely unintelligent, there's actually very many specialized types of knowledge which go into those hands-on professions, which have their own traditions, just like office work does, and the work of teachers and other information workers. For instance, when he looked at the daily work of a carpenter assembling some French doors, he found that the carpenter had to have a knowledge of geometry, what would look beautiful, the properties of different types of wood, and also the order in which to put together various components of the window before it would work and look beautiful and be installable in a house. And in the same way, a waitress would have to know, is the cook having a bad day? Did a certain order of ingredients come in late? How are people going to be feeling due to the weather, due to various other conditions outside, and how is she going to accommodate them all to give a pleasant experience? And because of the information he gave us, we can see that Mike Rose has a good understanding of the knowledge of types of workers which are not idealized in schools. And this problem is that by restricting the range of careers that we think are appropriate for children, we restrict intrinsic motivation by convincing them that it is wrong to have motivation to do anything other than information work. The final problem, leading to the lack of intrinsic motivation in schools is internalized grades.
Don't go over. As in, don't make it on over. Just do what you were planning.
Is the problem of internalized grades, probably the deepest rooted problem in schools today. Alfie Kohn's book, Feel Bad Education, which covers many different topics in pedagogy, focuses on the subject of cheating, which is rampant in today's schools. He looked at surveys done of several California high schools and other high schools across the nation, and found that cheating was more prevalent at schools where there was a more heavy focus on getting extremely good grades in preparation for college. It seems, based on these studies, that the more you restrict children's view to just the grade side of education, the more willing they become to pursue only the grade, to not get a deep and emotionally satisfying understanding of the material and of their life at school. The conclusion we can draw from this is that grades don't bring children knowledge. The content they study in school does, but the grades are an extrinsic reward that we should probably not stress so much if we want children to actually enjoy their lives and find the field of work and field of knowledge that's ideal for them. Now that we've gone over all the problems leading to the dearth of intrinsic motivation, we can look at good solutions. The two main components of a pedagogical solution to the lack of intrinsic motivation is to focus on de-stressing grades and also emphasizing and finding ways of building up children's knowledge of themselves and their own inner motivations. Alfie Kohn, once again, has a lot to say about the subject of grades. In his presentation, Good Education Equals No Grades and No Homework, he presented the idea that if we cancelled out grades from children's education at a significantly young age, the children would be taught not to focus on scores given by other people, and instead on their own internal motivations.
11.
The essay is ability grouping the way to go, or should it go away? Researchers studied the effects on learning of grouping students within a classroom by their grades. They found that a significantly negative effect was put upon the lower achieving students by grouping by grades, and that overall learning took place better at all strata if children were not rigorously separated by their former achievement levels. If we got rid of ability grouping and also the constant stress on grades alone, I think that the problem of intrinsic motivation would be significantly healed. The second component of a reformation of intrinsic motivation would be to start very young in each child's life on building knowledge of the self, the self's power, and the self's motivations. In the article, The Building Blocks of a Good Pre-K, the idea was brought up that perhaps, instead of expecting kindergartners to study for college prep tests, we should instead let them play with educational toys, which would allow them to learn how to socialize with others and learn many other skills, such as spatial, mathematical, and literary skills. Once again, Maria Montessori comes back. She's become famous for the schools named after her, which are based on her theories. And her educational structures are only suitable for toddlers. She doesn't go and provide curricula for any higher grades of students. So we'll have to resort to other researchers to give ways of producing intrinsic motivation in higher level students. But her form of education consists of not compelling or forcing a child to do anything unless the child has used force against others in a clearly evil act, such as hitting another child. She advises leaving children basically alone in a room full of interesting objects and having instructors go to children who are interested in the objects and teach them what lessons are meant to be learned by those objects. Unfortunately, as I said before, this method can't be extended beyond the age of toddlers. However, Marva Collins, a famous Chicago educator, came up with ways of extending knowledge of the self to higher grades. Along with self-knowledge, one specific part of self-knowledge is the knowledge of how to use reason. Collins mastered this by putting together her math lessons, for instance, in a way such that each subject rationally built upon the ones before. She would not do anything like skip from studying logarithms to all of a sudden studying trigonometry. There would have to be some sort of a connection made explicit between the two subject areas so that the students could see the connections between all areas of knowledge. In her classroom, she also introduced the Socratic method, where a teacher leads students through a sophisticated reading selection with abstract philosophical messages, and then asks the children to have a discussion with her about it. Basically, a Socratic Seminar. Another educational theorist who could help introduced the study of reason and how to integrate it into the self in schools is Leonard Peikoff. In his book, The Dim Hypothesis, he exposed the fact that the curricula of many schools across the country are too broad for students to integrate all the information in a way that makes sense. Basically, the effect of going from a cooking class to a basketball class, then to a language arts class, is very disruptive to students' chains of thought. It doesn't teach them how to connect any fields of knowledge in a rational way, and it distracts from studying the skills that are most important, which are math, science, literature, and also history. He advises reducing the curricula of a school to just those 4 subjects, because they're the most broad-reaching and the ones that cover the most ground. In a large way, Marva Collins' method of the Socratic Seminar is introduced in the Flex program, which, as you know, takes place at this school. The Socratic Seminar method is used extensively in Flex, and is in fact the core thing which differentiates Flex from conventional language arts and other school programs. The effect of a Socratic Seminar is to get students to not think of transferring one piece of information to one box in a test, but using pieces of information to prove many smaller statements, and also using many small pieces of information to prove or lead up to a large conclusion. Basically, it teaches, ideally, students induction and deduction. Finally, this brings up my service project. I led a Socratic seminar at the Baldwin Library for 7th and 9th graders at the Baldwin Library, and I led the class in the same way that I observed the Flex teachers leading a seminar. The results were quite positive. In conclusion, there is a solution present for the problem of intrinsic motivation. Make sure that no child is ever forced to do something that they are not interested in at the level of toddlers and elementary school. At higher levels of learning, introduce course plans, but have a simple course structure and a rational way of teaching it to children. And always remember not to stress grades too much, or your children will think about the numbers and not the content itself. In short, hope exists in the form of the Flex program and the thoughts of these various educational theorists. I hope that this has helped lift any worries that you may have felt about your child's behavior. Thank you.